Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're about to dive into an incredibly high-stakes historical drama. We're looking closely at a critical juncture in the 1950s that literally determined the survival of a global faith. It's this breathtaking story of unexpected tragedy, meticulous legal texts, and a stunning display of human restraint. Okay, let's jump right into this.
I want you to pose this to yourself for just a second. What actually happens when a worldwide leader dies, leaving absolutely no will and no clear successor? History tells us time and time again that a sudden power vacuum almost always leads to chaos, splintering, and massive power grabs. But today, we're looking at the extraordinary events of 1957 within the Baha'i faith, where the exact opposite happened.
Act 1. The Foreshadowing. For 36 years, the Baha'i world had been guided by one single, divinely appointed mind, Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith. And without knowing his time was incredibly short, he providentially prepared an institution right before his sudden passing. If we look at this timeline, in June 1957, he clearly defined the twin functions of the hands of the cause, protecting and propagating the faith. Then, just weeks before his death in October, he actually named them the chief stewards of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world commonwealth. And then, in November, tragedy struck.
Now this number right here, 27, is absolutely crucial. In that October message, Shoghi Effendi elevated the number of these hands of the cause to 27, or as he famously wrote, thrice 9. When November arrived, these 27 individuals suddenly, and without any warning whatsoever, found themselves bearing the entire weight of the Baha'i world.
Act 2. The Crisis.
So, picture this. Late 1957. Shoghi Effendi travels to London to purchase furniture for the International Archives building back in Haifa. While there, he catches the severe Asiatic influenza sweeping across Europe at the time. Despite a terrible fever, he literally refused to rest. When his widow, Ruhiya Khanum, begged him to step away from the massive 10-year crusade map he was painstakingly checking, he replied, "No. I must finish it. It is worrying me. There is nothing left to do but check it. I have 1 or 2 names to add that I have found in this mail, and I will finish it today." The setting of his very last days was, characteristically, unyielding work.
Early in the morning of November 4th, doctors concluded he had suffered a sudden heart attack in his sleep. This devastating, verbatim telegram was sent out by his widow to the worldwide community. Read those last words closely. Urge believers remain steadfast, cling institution hands. In the very first breath of the community's immense grief, it pointed not to despair or confusion, but directly to the institution the Guardian had just finished fortifying.
Right away, a strict point of religious law completely shaped what had to happen next. You might naturally expect a leader of his stature to be flown back to the faith's world center in the Holy Land, right? However, the Kitab-i-Aqdas, a central text of the faith, contains a strict law limiting the transport of the deceased to an hour's journey from the place of death. Shoghi Effendi had fiercely defended this law in life, making a return to Haifa completely impossible. So, arrangements were made for a burial in a peaceful cemetery near London.
The graveside service was, as you can imagine, profoundly emotional. Around 360 believers from both the East and West attended. Ruhiya Khanum wrote this incredibly beautiful description of the scene, reading, "The morning had been sunny and fair. Now a gentle shower started and sprinkled a few drops on the coffin, as if nature herself were suddenly moved to tears." It really anchors this massive historical shift in very genuine human grief.
Act 3. The Search for a Will. So, as the initial shock and grief started to settle, a terrifying legal crisis basically unfolded overnight. The entire Baha'i world naturally assumed the line of guardians would continue since previous foundational texts had clearly envisioned that possibility. So the absolute first task was a frantic physical search. On November 19th, 9 hands of the cause entered Shoghi Effendi's securely locked apartment in Haifa and meticulously searched for a will or really any secret instructions. The chilling conclusion? None were found. There was no will.
But here's the absolute crucial point we need to grasp. We need to understand why there was no will. This wasn't some careless oversight. It was actually an act of strict obedience. You see, Abdu'l-Baha's will and testament required a second guardian to be a male descendant appointed during Shoghi Effendi's lifetime and approved by 9 hands. The harsh reality was that Shoghi Effendi had no children and all eligible descendants had broken the covenant. He simply couldn't appoint a successor without violating the very texts he was sworn to protect.
Act 4, 6 years of restraint.
So now, the hands of the cause suddenly found themselves with literally complete authority over a global faith. While history expects a group in this exact position to immediately consolidate power, they chose a path of absolute self-abnegation, governing purely by fidelity. They held conclaves, elected 9 custodians to serve at the world's center, and made it their unwavering ruling principle to never deviate a hair's breadth from Shoghi Effendi's existing plans. They didn't invent new paths. Actually, they deferred unwritten matters to the future Universal House of Justice and focused entirely on finishing the blueprints that were already in place.
And, looking at the numbers brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly effective their disciplined stewardship really was. Look at this explosive growth during what was an incredibly dangerous interregnum. From roughly 4,100 localities in 1957, the faith exploded to over 11,000 by 1963. They finished houses of worship, grew national assemblies, and carried out the global plan without missing a single beat.
Act 5. The Test of Ambition.
Of course, no historical drama is really complete without a massive challenge from within, right? While the collective body of the hands showed unmatched selflessness, a shocking test arose from their own ranks, proving that the covenant is tested not just by sudden loss, but by human ambition. Charles Mason Remy, who, by the way, was one of the 9 who actually signed the statement that no successor existed, totally reversed himself in 1960. At age 84, he claimed to be the second guardian, based on a council presidency, completely ignoring all the explicit textual requirements. When ambition awoke, he abandoned established principles and was subsequently expelled.
The climax, a foundation assured. But despite this shocking internal test, the main body of the hands held totally firm, executing a highly disciplined step-by-step process to safely transition their power. First, they rallied the world to complete the massive 10-year crusade. Second, they arranged for the election of an International Baha'i Council in 1961. And finally, the ultimate goal, preparing for the election of the Universal House of Justice in 1963.
And guys, this right here is what makes this story so breathtaking. The hands of the cause joyfully relinquished their temporary authority. Furthermore, they explicitly asked not to be considered for election to the Universal House of Justice. Having absolute, unchecked control over the affairs of the faith, they willingly disqualified themselves to place themselves entirely at the service of this new elected body.
In 1965, the newly formed Universal House of Justice basically rendered its definitive verdict on this era, stating, "The entire history of religion shows no comparable record of such strict self-discipline, such absolute loyalty, and such complete self-abnegation by the leaders of a religion finding themselves suddenly deprived of their divinely inspired guide. It truly was an unmatched display of restraint."
When you really look at it, this entire era boils down to one single, absolutely crucial principle: their one safe course. The hands knew the precise limits of their own authority. They knew they were not divinely guided in the same way the guardian was, and so they governed entirely within their limits, relying only on what had been clearly established. It's a profound spiritual lesson that true authority is conferred, not seized.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. History expects those with absolute control to keep it, to consolidate it, to fight tooth and nail for it. What can we, in our own lives and organizations, learn from leaders whose greatest, most protective act was recognizing their limits and willingly stepping aside? Thank you so much for exploring this incredible historical anomaly with me. Keep reflecting on that and keep learning.